Welcome to the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, inspiring you to discover yours. I've had a burning question over the past week or so since thinking about this episode that I have to ask up front. It seems the most obvious one for this very episode. How do I know an athletic shoulder? Can you see it? Is it obvious when you see it? Or are there caveats? Are there things that you have to suss out before you can decide that you can see an athletic shoulder there and then? So we've got Ben Ashworth here today to answer that very question.
Firstly, thanks for having me. And it's a great question. We're reflecting on that at the moment as a company. I'm really trying to distill down what an athletic shoulder looks like. And really, it's a sort of high-performing shoulder. You know, it's not exclusive to athletes. There are people who do amazing things with their shoulders that aren't actually traditional athletes per se. And there are operators who need to function at below 100%. But in true terms, it's optimizing someone's physical capability to be able to perform under high pressure, high stakes. And not just to do that as a one-off performance, but to do that repeatedly. So the necessary amounts of training and development without breaking down. So there's an element of, are they good enough to achieve the optimum performance? But there's also, and certainly from my background being a physio, there's this element of maintaining health under those conditions, those high stakes conditions. And so we try and distill that down into what does it look like. And for me, because that's such a complex, quite nebulous concept, we try and break it into like a more reductionist model where we can break it down into testing. And then once we can test, we can then break that down into, okay, well, here's the areas of weakness. Here's some of the gaps within that particular athlete and their shoulder. And the other thing I'm thinking there as we speak about it is that it's not just the shoulder, right? Every athletic shoulder is connected to the human.
Yes.
And so there's so much more that goes into it than just looking locally. And that brings in then the need to think about force transfer, about, you know, people talk about the kinetic chain, but I'm not sure they necessarily really know what kinetic chain means. It's about force transfer, and in an elite performer, that means high intensity. That means high intensity training, testing, loading, recovery, and doing it repeatedly and sustainably and thriving, not just hanging on and surviving.
I like what you've just said there around force transfer. I'm not necessarily differentiated because kinetic chains have always seemed a little abstract for me, almost a bit too reductionist as well. This equals that, therefore we can call it a chain. I don't think that makes sense that much to me. I think that the patterns clearly exist, but force transfer, because then it can be about any part of the body that's transferring in. And the other part of the body that really jumped out at me when you were speaking there, you said about physical capabilities. Someone needs to have the mental capabilities too, and the ability to neurologically connect what's going on in their mind to the limb, to the shoulder.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, we are very clear on the physical effort rather than the mental effort. If we ask for an RPE, it's a rate of physical, not the mental, because that in itself can be different. And there's some psychological elements then, you know, around injury and return to play, chronic long-term recoveries, where that psychological piece plays a much bigger part of the whole.
Yeah, a bit like the ACL studies that have identified one of the biggest risk factors for re-injury is the psychologically not being ready.
Yeah.
Them reporting they're not feeling ready. More powerful than a lot of the physical testing. Is there anything like that for the shoulder?
Yeah. So we, alongside the physical measures that we take with the people that we work with, we'll look at, there's a shoulder index, effectively. And it's all about confidence, which I really like. So how confident are you as an athlete that you're going to be able to go back and do what you want to do? But equally, how confident are we as a team supporting that athlete that they're going to be able to go back and do what they need to do without breaking down? there's a 10 questionnaire. It's very similar to the ACL stuff, and most of the things we'll talk about, I'm sure, is how the shoulder stuff is way behind knees and hamstrings and low backs.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's one, around the complexity, two, around this, it's almost a blind spot for people. They will do a really good job and they're exposed to perhaps more knees and hips and lower bodies and low backs when they're developing in their career, and perhaps don't see as many shoulders, and then fail to take all the principles and models that they've learned from the lower body and back and apply them to the shoulder. So this blind spot's something I see a lot.
And if we're going back to this athletic shoulder, is it pretty obvious when it isn't an athletic shoulder? And if it isn't an athletic shoulder, what are the common problems that you see?
Yeah, I mean, we work with multiple types of athletes. And so there are people who are athletes, professional athletes, who are out there playing, competing, but not necessarily at their best. They're functioning. And athletes cheat, don't they? So they cheat really well. There's probably a lot of people compensating. I think it's optimizing their potential as an athlete. All right, that's the important thing. That's the main thing that we need to think about when we're looking across it, and then how that then translates into kind of other people that we work with. We apply the same principles, and we would apply the same principles to any of our clients. We're objective, we use data, we use information, but we might have older clients, people whose performance demands are, playing paddle once a week, or going fishing, or playing the violin. They'll still get shoulder problems, and it's about making sure there's no mismatch between their physical capability and what they're trying to do, and that then encompasses anybody that's got a shoulder issue. We've focused on athletes because that's the bread and butter of the people we work with at the elite end, but then that trickles down into everybody.
Well, it's also where you came from. You've spent a big chunk of your career working with elite athletes and starting out at Wasps. The rugby environment is hugely demanding on a shoulder, and I spent some of my early career working in rugby, playing and then physioing in rugby as well. And that's why I'm pretty comfortable with shoulders, because I was seeing a lot of it. And I think most young physios who want to be in sports would do very well to be involved in rugby, specifically first, or at least early, because there's so much you get, so much volume of injury, so much variety. I did a lot of work in football too, but that's less variety, less volume. You don't see as much. It's fun, enjoyable. I like football, but the physio learning I got from rugby was invaluable for my ability to tape, my ability to deal with concussion, my ability to deal with shoulders. It's been really, really helpful where I am now. Is there anything in addition to being exposed to rugby that prompted you to be specialising in shoulders, or was there other stuff that went on throughout your journey that led to you being the Ben Ashworth, the Ash test, the shoulder specialist?
I mean, it probably goes back to, I had a lot of exposure and patient mileage when I was straight out of physio school, out of university, and very targeted around outpatients. And then I ended up in Land Rover vehicles, which actually no one really knows because I don't really talk about it. But that was 3 years of 20 patients a day with upper limb related work disorders, which inevitably is working under cars, building Land Rovers and Range Rovers, and they were getting a load of acute shoulder injuries that you just wouldn't see in the NHS. So that exposure, and then going on the courses and not having the same profile of the people in front of you, you could get away with training, learning, making mistakes without being on the back pages. So that was the sort of incubator for my own learning, and I think that really elevated where I then ended up.
It's really interesting because my first job was working in Dagenham engine plant.
Yeah.
So very similar environment, occupational health, dealing with people doing slightly strange, repetitive jobs.
Yep.
And also not always happy with what they're doing as well. So lots of psychological stuff, lots of baggage that came with that. So I speak very highly of my experience there. I think it really set me up early to be doing a lot of MSK early in my career.
Yeah.
And there's some different MSK, not just the NHS outpatient stuff. So yeah, I can vouch for that experience too.
It's the breadth of that. It's the, like with any development or personal learning, is if you can apply it, you know, see one, do one, teach one, you're like there, you're learning about it, you're applying it, you're testing it, and you're getting that feedback loop yourself of what's working for you. And then you can start to build a bit of a philosophy. And then when you actually get to the big leagues, you've got more confidence. Certainly, though, you still have a lot of learning to do about the application in that particular environment. So whether it's rugby or actually going back to your original question, probably the place that developed the most was British Judo. And if you take rugby and the collision athlete and then you apply throwing and you put the two of them together, you've got judo. So we had a huge volume of shoulder injuries in our elite athletes across 3 years, where I was basically responsible for trying to keep them healthy and get them to the Olympics. And that was then where I was fully embedded. And that's where my shoulder game had to go up a level.
Do you remember any of the development leaps around that time? Because that is a real intense learning exposure right there. If you've got the perfect storm for shoulder injuries, you've got the incoming Olympics of like, we have to have as full a squad as possible ready for this.
Yeah.
So they need to be training. You've got to have them available for training. They've got to be fit, ready. You've got to deal with the injuries that are inevitably going to come. You're trying to prevent injury as well. So the perfect storm. Do you remember any leaps around that time, any mistakes, any things that were going on around that really drove things forward?
I think the leaps are, you're five labral repairs deep every day. And you're just getting better and better and better, much faster than anybody else. And they're all individuals. So we had the men's and women's team, different techniques. And we had, like, I remember about probably 11 months out from the games, one of the players, one of the girls, she had a labral repair, specific technique that basically put her shoulder in a horrible position. And then she had to load and throw from that position. And, you know, it's a long story if you look at the success behind it. The success was, how did we build support around her and her coaching team to get her back able to compete early enough that she could have the mileage and the reps with her competitors that would enable her to then get to the games and be competitive at the games. It wasn't about the success. She achieved an Olympic silver medal, which was unheard of, really. It was about the process. So the outcome we could all look at as being a great success, but the process was the real leap for me.
And that process laid the foundations for the athletic shoulder concept, I imagine.
Absolutely. So objective data around training camps and competitions. We're in Korea. Gemma Gibbons it was, by the way. We can talk about it with her full permission. She was grumbling with her shoulder, probably back on the edge. And that's what an athletic shoulder challenge is as well. It's pushing people on the knife edge, on the bleeding edge, without pushing them over the edge. How are we making decisions on whether she trains today? You know, she's not going to get that exposure back home in the UK. So when we're on a training camp, we need her out there training as much as possible. How do we make that decision? We can't wrap her up in cotton wool. So we made those decisions actually using a handheld dynamometer at the time. I remember begging the EIS to buy a Lafayette dynamometer so I could take that with me around the world. And then I had a phone goniometer on my iPhone. And I used just those two measures to decide whether the sessions she was going through had a cost. And we kind of worked out that when her range dropped in a particular position below a certain range, we'd probably end up with some impingement type symptoms. When her strength started to drop, again, we probably needed to give her an extra day's recovery. And then we got her through probably like a 2 to 3 week Far East trip, which included, I think, Japan, Korea and China, at a critical moment of her return and preparation for the Olympic Games.
And these ideas are now relatively common within high performance. At the time, I mean, I wasn't involved in high performance then. I don't believe they were. So let's consider that this was innovative. Where does innovation, where does that come from you? Can you think experiences there and ideas that, how did you join those dots? I mean, by the sounds of it, there's just a real curiosity about how can you solve a complex problem.
That's exactly it. The curiosity, the need to deliver, the lack of willingness to admit defeat around not being able to solve problems, and that can, by the way, lead to its own frustrations and probably some mistakes. But I think that was it. You nailed it. The curiosity, and then that sense of, like, at the time, probably personal achievement, trying to really become one of the best or optimize my own potential physios, and that was probably my focus at the time, was just that sense of willingness and achievement and not quite feeling like I'd made it. And I had that opportunity with that group to really knuckle down and finally sort of almost deliver on a project where I was responsible for it. That was the main focus of that, and that's what then led to everything since, was the melting pot of actually having to deliver myself. I wasn't working for someone else. It was finally down to me. What happened, what the screening looked like, what the monitoring looked like, what the pre-session preparation looked like, how I linked with coaches, how we scaled that across the different training venues across the country with the different coaches and the different demands, and then take that on the road. That whole challenge in itself just brings together problem solving, from all angles. And I think that's something I always seek out, is just that ability to like challenge myself.
Yeah, it really resonates for me. As I was looking into your career and listening to some of your previous conversations with other people, this idea of the high performance physio really kind of came to me. It resonates with me because I think that's where I was certainly early in my career. That's what I was trying to be. I was trying to be the best physio I could be, putting myself in environments where I was always learning, taking myself out of those environments when I stopped learning. And every time I've moved in my career, it's for those reasons. And when I'm hearing you speak, it's a different version of the same thing there, of like really trying to be the best physio you can be and trying to achieve in those environments. But I also know that it can be a lonely place. I've spent too much time on my own in my career. I'm an introvert. I've spoken about that on this podcast a few times. I've learned how to be extroverted when I need to be, but my natural preset is to be an introvert. So I can slip into my own world too much and forget that there's other people out there that I can learn from. There's a bit of that I can hear from your story there. I'm trying to be the best version of me. How is that? How have you taken some wisdom over your career and learned from that experience?
Yeah. I smile because I could hear myself talking about it, and it was a bit me, not us and we, which is now where I am. And you learn, don't you? I was a younger man. But when I reflect on where I was there, the reason why I was pushing myself to be better was not intrinsic purely. It was the people around me. And there were some brilliant people around me at the time who, if I look to my left or my right, there's someone doing great things. So that environment and that culture around that pre-games 2012, if you look at all the people that were involved in there, you've got Alex Wolff, you've got James Moore, Mark Young, you've got all these people, Joe Collins, who was actually, a fast track practitioner back then, has gone on to great things. You've got Ben Rosenblatt, Dan Howells, you've got all these people from that era. And we were in an incubator, solving problems for yourself in the moment and for the people that you were working with directly. But then you had the whole network and the organisation wide to be able to then go and ask, to pass the ball, not to hold on to it. I think that was what accelerated all of our development at that point. And I think then, since then, plus, by the way, kind of I think one of the things that made me stop focusing on myself was when, I met my wife, which was, we've been married 15 years now, but a great influence on me. And I started to actually ask for help, and I started to ask other people for help. And I started to see that there was huge reward in doing that. The reason you focus on yourself often is because you don't want to be found out as an imposter or as someone who doesn't know something. I remember going into work in fear of going into work with James Moore, because we were going to talk about hamstring cases, and I knew he was an absolute genius. And he was part of the team of the EIS, and I'd be reading hamstring papers till midnight and 1 o'clock to try and keep up with him, just to try and sort of stay on a level playing field with someone who's that sharp in that particular area. But that was being dragged through it, basically trying to do it all on your own. And you can't. You can't be the best hamstring guy, the best hip guy, the best, well, maybe James can be, but you have to have more breadth, and you have to also recognise that whilst you can do anything, you can't do everything, as they say. So then you have to focus in on the things that matter to you, and you have to be a little bit more clear about the roadmap for your own personal development and the realism around it, and who can help you to get from where you are and actually truly move from where you are to where you want to go to.
There was a period in my career where I was asked to decide what my specialism was going to be. And I remember having a real difficult few weeks thinking, hang on a minute, what is my specialism? I love working in sport. I love working in clinic. I love working with complicated cases. I love working with chronic pain. I love working with shoulders, knees, ankles. I love working with athletes. I love working with non-athletes. I don't think I can be a specialist. And there was this real challenge of trying to decide and then thinking, actually, I'm just going to tell them I like complex cases, because it meant that I could then carry on seeing all of the injuries that came through. But as a result, I did start to get a bit more of a reputation for solving the complex problems, because I decided I was going to be broad. I didn't want to narrow in. As a result, I'm not the best shoulder physio. I'm not the best knee physio. I'm not the best hip physio. But I can really bring in information from all my experience in sport and in clinic to think about things a little differently. And my health knowledge is pretty good. My sports science knowledge is good. I did a degree in that. So I'm able to just draw on the general and bring it into my world, where maybe another physio hasn't figured things out. How did you end up deciding that it was shoulders for you there?
Yeah.
And because I also know that you don't just have a knowledge base in shoulders either. I know that your knowledge is quite broad. So how have you managed to balance that for you when you were going through that period in your life?
Yeah, you just, again, it's a byproduct of the problems you're solving in the moment, and then you're developing faster than other people in that area. Just again, it's the judo incubator, if you like. That fast tracks your own development. You're learning more, you're reading more, you're asking more questions, and then you're able to apply that and get instant feedback. So that is developing that niche, and then people start to ask you your opinion. And then when you start that out, you're thinking, well, I don't know whether I'm any better than anybody else. But then you've got these people who are doing great things around hips and groins, and there's good courses. And that was Mark and James's course at the time was a flagship for physio and real good content around a particular area and how to solve it. And I wanted to do what they did at the time. So how do I achieve that? Then I looked at Dan Lewandon at the time, who was at England Rugby, and I've always loved rugby, and good sort of collaborative work with Dan over the years. And he came and gave a presentation about injury prevention at one of the EIS conferences, and he had MSc on his name or something in strength and conditioning. And I remember turning to a colleague and going, right, I need one of those as well. So there's just this development of an understanding of the broader aspects that can help you, and the frameworks about generally being a better physio. So exploring strength and conditioning principles and how that applies. The ability to distill down content into models and frameworks that really are clear about the way that you are working. And then the other piece was, at the time within the English Institute of Sport, a guy called Ian Horsley was, certainly a mentor for me. Someone who finally I could have a conversation with, and every conversation I went away thinking, wow, his knowledge is exceptional in this particular area. And Ian and I went on to develop some courses which we then started to deliver, firstly to hospitals, to clinicians, and then eventually we were invited into sports teams, and then that has basically been how things have gone since. That was about 2009 to present day, where I spoke to Ian yesterday, but we do slightly different things now. But the athletic shoulder courses, as you know, and we'll probably talk about, are now used worldwide by practitioners in the highest levels, as well as across the world in terms of physios who are interested in shoulders. So that's the kind of path of developing a specialism, and I suppose it's right place, right time, and putting together all of your own personality, and then just recognizing that you can be elevating yourself. You can be a very good general physio, but if you really focus on one area, you can become one of the world's best in that.
Yeah, and that's what I was really interested in, is that we've both got this high performance physio mentality. Mine's taken me into a general way, and yours has gone specialism. And I just think that listeners out there can really take that idea that there's opportunities going in both directions, depending on what works for you, what suits your style and your personality. I think that's really helpful. And then there's some great women in the background that have humbled us both and kept our feet on the ground. So
yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, we had our 10-year wedding anniversary the other day, so we're a little bit behind you. So congratulations.
Thank you. Same to you.
If you're then taking that shoulder specialism, how do you end up in football, Arsenal in particular? I know you were with Arsenal for quite a few years, a sport where the majority of injuries happen, waist down.
It was really simple. It was one of the best jobs out there at the time. And I remember Raf Brandon at the EIS about 9 months before the Olympic Games, and he was doing a coaching course. And again, I asked him for help and he'd offered it. And he was coaching me, and I was sitting in a pub in Richmond where some of our coaching sessions happened, personal development. And he said, what are you going to be doing in July 2012? And I went, I'm going to be working for British Judo at the Olympic Games and achieve a career goal to go to an Olympic Games with the team. What are you going to be doing in August 2012? I said, I'm not going to be working for British Judo. And he said, so you've got 9 months to find yourself a new job then. And that was a moment of, I don't tend to panic, but that was a real smack in the face moment for me. And then I really had to think about what came up next. And these jobs don't get advertised, but that year, I think it must have been the March, April time, Arsenal advertised the first team physio job, and it came up. I remember seeing it thinking, I'm not going to get that. That's going to be for football people and people who've got football experience. But luckily, Colin Lewin and Gary O'Driscoll at the time were looking for a different lens on that world, and they were trying to bring in people from outside of football to help them to solve some of the problems that they were having.
Quite fortunate, because I am an Arsenal fan, and my memory is that there were a few shoulder injuries going on around that era. Theo Walcott, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. I think there was a keeper who had a bit of a shoulder injury. So I imagine actually that opportunity was there and that need was there within the squad.
Yeah, and my presentation, when I gave it to them, instead of being this is what I would do, it was this is what I have done within the judo environment. And I think that was more powerful than I could ever have imagined, because there was the problem, and this is how I'd solved that with the people around me collaboratively, and I could showcase, and every single question that they had, I had a really solid example of how I'd helped or supported, and it was, probably one of the best jobs I've had is judo, just because of how it translated into my own personal development.
I've heard people talk about the perfect job, and how the perfect job gives someone autonomy, a sense of purpose, and the opportunity to master skills. It sounds like you had those three in that very early job there, which normally people who are in that level of experience don't get those opportunities. So it really does sound like that was the melting pot for you of getting all those opportunities to really learn fast. We've ended up being back at judo quite a lot, so clearly it was a very influential part of your career that's then taken you off and been a bit of springboard for all these other opportunities that come. I mentioned when we were speaking just before the episode that I met you just at that starting point when you were doing your as it was called, the area course, the Advanced Resuscitation Emergency Aid, as you were going into Arsenal. And I was just starting my journey with the FA at that point. It was I can't remember if it was my first one. It probably was my first one, actually, yeah. So I was massive imposter syndrome 2 or 3 years into my career, given the opportunity to work for the FA. And here I was sitting next to, at the time, my head was like, Ben Ashworth, Arsenal physio, God, how cool is this? And you were very relieved to hear me say that you gave me the time of day. And
yeah, I'm delighted.
And we had a good conversation. And I remember walking away thinking, he's a good guy, he's going to do big things. And you've gone on to do some great things in your career. Tell us about where that then took you then. So you're in Arsenal as the first team physiotherapist, and I know that as much as you've specialised within shoulders, you've actually also ended up being in performance director roles, which require you to be very generalist. So tell us about how things ended up there.
Yeah, so one of the other parts of the judo thing were the MSc in strength and conditioning. The other bit that people don't really know is I was working Tuesdays, Thursday evenings at Blackheath to keep a hand in rugby, and then Saturday match day. So for those of people who want to emulate, you have to get out there. And I was doing that Blackheath stuff for a bit of pocket money. It wasn't like bringing in a load of cash.
I was doing the same at Barking Rugby, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays. Yeah.
So again, it was just curiosity and the love of and actually the gratitude that I got from the Blackheath gig. So at the time, I had a wonderful portfolio of things that were just basically helping me develop. Then alongside that, the S&C stuff, then Arsenal, and just that. Well, firstly, I think that was, whilst judo was the job that allowed me the autonomy, Arsenal was where I really felt like I'd finally made it. And then I can feel now like the hairs are standing up on the back to my arms and my neck. It's just like, finally I've made it, but you haven't, because you've still got to then prove yourself. And I know for a fact that the people that came a very close second to me in that interview process were very good people. And they took a bit of a punt on me based on my experiences. And probably for the first 3 to 6 months, there could have still been some doubts of whether I was going to sustain in that environment and be able to succeed. But 6 happy years later, with a load of evolution and challenges and all of the things as we developed as a team, a high performance team there, that then was probably the making of me, really. And external reputation, etc. The badge gives you that, but it's not about that. It's the feeling comfortable in your own skin. The fact that you don't have to prove anything to anybody else anymore, and certainly you don't have to prove anything to yourself. That's the critical piece. And then you can start to do good work. So it's a long journey up to that point. But then after that, as you say, the director of performance role came in, and that was because of a relationship with a player, someone who I'd helped, Thomas Rosicky, who then asked me to come and help them set up what he saw me trying to do with the team at Arsenal, and to try and distill that down into something that could help them change and develop the team in Prague.
You scored one of my favourite ever goals against Tottenham. Absolute screamer into the top left. Yeah.
What a legend. I mean, a legend for any Arsenal fan, but actually most people think he's a legend of a player.
And how does something like the ASH test then come about? Because it's now used worldwide as a standard way of assessing shoulders. Where did that come from? Maybe describe it first, because there'll be some people maybe don't know what it is.
So the athletic shoulder test, the ASH test, that came from the beautiful synergy of working with force platforms at Arsenal, looking at lower body injuries. The relationship I had with Saracens Rugby Club, trying to solve upper limb shoulder injuries, and then Daniel Cohen was the kind of connector between the two. Daniel Cohen's a force platform specialist and legend. And so between us, we were trying to solve contact shoulder problems. And I remember turning up every morning at Arsenal before anybody was there in the rehab area. And I'd take the isometric hamstring testing with the force plates, which we were doing every week after every game. And I'd try and work out a way of doing the same thing for shoulders. So the athletic shoulder test is a long lever isometric test in 3 positions, which measures peak force and rate of force, essentially of the anterior chain and the anterior shoulder. And it's at 90 degrees and above, and there's not many tests like that. And it replicates almost an arm tackle position. If someone went past you and you stuck your arm out. The beauty of the ASH test, as I said, is it gives you the strength, peak force, but it also gives you rate of force development and explosivity. So that is where that came from. Me in the mornings trying to solve that problem. Curiosity. The beauty of the process we'd built with hamstring monitoring. And again, that was one of my babies at Arsenal, was developing that to try and solve the hamstring pandemic that we had at the time. All of that came together, right place, right time, with the right people. And that's where the ASH test originated.
I was thinking about this recently. Why long lever? I think I know, but a lot of sport is around short lever.
Yeah.
So what was it about long lever that ended up sticking?
Well, the beauty, as I said, was we had a sharp team we were working with at Sarries. So it was Laura Tullett, Paddy Hogben, and then we had Nav, who was sports scientist at Arsenal as well. So we could ask them, what problem are you trying to solve? Well, we've got short lever testing already, and they're passing it. They're bench pressing silly amounts in the gym, everything quite close into the body. But when we return them to contact, we've got episodes of instability and pain and or weakness. There's no way of quantifying that. There's no test that's quantifying that. And that's where that came from. So it's quite simple. It's just like a needs must. It came from a performance need for them. And that's where that, I remember literally drawing it on the back of a beer mat. Again, at another, I think it was St George's Park for an at-MIF at that point. But overnight I was trying to create it, and then it was whiteboards and drawings on the whiteboard, and then it was me getting down and dirty, and then it was, let's try it on a couple of the shoulder injuries we had at the time. And Saracens found some historical players that they could see big asymmetries in just from a peak force perspective straight away. Even neck stingers were showing up on the ASH test. And then as they built some data, and by the way, this is all me working through the team who are delivering it, as most of my good work has ever been, we then started to develop a better understanding. And then there was a need to produce some research around, is this test reliable? And that's when we published the ASH test in 2018. So we started this in 2016. Perhaps the team don't get as much credit as they should for that paper. They're all on the paper. It's difficult to constantly reference them, but here's a nod of the cap to them.
Yeah.
But they were a huge part of that initial development.
And what did the research show in the end then?
The research showed that when you tested day 1, day 2, it was super reliable for peak force. We didn't do a rate of force development measure, and that's been a labour of love since about the last 10 years. Is in practice, we've seen really good rate of force development consistently. But in research, there were no publications. So now, having just submitted my PhD thesis 3 weeks ago, we know much more clearly about what rate of force development looks like in an upper limb, and how the clarity on the kind of environment and constraints and coaching that you need to get the best data out of that test. And it's something that you can trust. But like with anything where you constrain the time window to produce force, there's going to be more volatility and variability around that particular test.
So someone gets someone on into the ASH test, when they're looking at the data that comes from that, what kind of metrics should they be considering, given that peak force, rate of force development are the two main metrics? We generally think that less than 10% asymmetry is important, but I know sometimes even with ACLs, we'll go there again, some people will argue 5% is probably better. Is there any headline numbers you'd give to people?
We've just actually put together for VALD Performance we put together basically a shoulder resource which has all of our thresholds in based on body weight normalized values, so peak force, and then we've got some standards for rate of force as well. So, you know, in an I position with the arm directly above the head, it's 2 newtons per kilogram. In a T position, it's 1.5 to 1.6 newtons per kilogram for peak force. And then rate of force, we see some of the most explosive athletes on the planet can hit 2,000 newtons per second at 100 milliseconds. But we would see a past mark as being around 500 newtons per second in that small blink of an eye time window. So for those people listening now going, what is he talking about? You can see my passion for it, and we've just seen so many numbers. But I think that's a really nice couple of lines in the sand for people who've not used this test before. And when a player says, or when a client says, is that a good or bad? Well, we're publishing a bit more of that stuff. We're trying to share content. But those are our lines in the sand. And then we dial in a little bit more if it was, you know, a women's rugby player, or if it was an NFL player, or if it was a baseball pitcher. We kind of mould our standards based on our experiences.
Oh, I could definitely get excited about numbers too. I love to test and use detail, and I see it as a real powerful behaviour change and motivator as well. I think we can really get people buying in, and certainly in the I mean, it's the athletic population is pretty standard now. They want to know the numbers. It's pretty clear that they'll be really intricate with that. But I think in the general population, that works just as well sometimes to get someone doing what you want them to do. However, there is sometimes the temptation to get really carried away with it and just create a big portfolio of numbers for the sake of it. And I heard you speaking on a podcast about the need to make sure you're going to use the data. Don't just capture it for the sake of it. Really make sure you're going to use it. And for some people, you might end up choosing one number, and for others, you might have 5 or 10 because they're more likely to engage with it. Now that you are working more in general population as well as with athletes, how do you start to figure out what tests to use for one person or what tests to use for others?
We have a testing framework, and it basically starts with the absolute essentials, the things we're definitely going to use. And then we'll add layers below that depending on perhaps the level of complexity, perhaps the level of information that a team would want, and perhaps maybe the opportunity, the time, the investment from the person, and the willingness to want to learn more. So we wouldn't go without testing something objective. And I think, I always say this, people get this quote wrong, but I always say, if you're not assessing, you're guessing, right? And I'm not sure where that came from. It's not my quote, but people get that wrong. But effectively, what we identify is that people who've seen physios or other people for their shoulder come to see us because they're frustrated. And this isn't to be, degrading to anybody else, but just the way we look at it might then identify some real clarity on a lack of mobility or a lack of strength or a direction-specific loss of force. And that allows us to then guide the training. And that's so important in our models and our frameworks. And that's why we end up with this great feedback loop with our clients. And if we don't have that information, we can get as lost as the next person. And then as the complexity of the case gets more and more and more, if you don't have a frame of reference to come back to, you're left there guessing.
I think what you touched on right at the beginning of that explanation there is why some people get a bit carried away with, like, you don't have to test everything. It's like the people who have a relatively straightforward problem, they don't end up with you anyway.
Yeah,
like you've created a service and an expertise that suits the complicated problem that perhaps has failed other people, or it's an athlete who really demands to have no stone unturned type philosophies. So this kickback against this concept, I understand it, because there are some people who don't need the bells and whistles. They don't need absolutely everything, but by the time they come to you, they do.
Yeah,
on average, that's what they're there for. So I think people out there, if they have heard both sides of this argument, just think about the person in front of you. Are they 2 weeks into a bit of a sore shoulder, or are they 2 years into a complicated shoulder problem? And at that point, you can then decide the way that you approach it. And that's what this conversation, I think, is about, is helping the person out there figure out which type of shoulder specialist do you need to be in that moment. How much of the Ben Ashworth stuff do you need to take on board, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if you are serious about your shoulders and you're developing a shoulder pain and you're wanting to do a high rocks, or you're starting to change your training in whatever form that looks like, actually it makes a lot of sense to go and get some decent advice. And I think sometimes if we don't act early, at that point when they get their pain or their symptoms, that's when they're seeing they have a shoulder problem, but that's been developing for a while. So we don't need to see every shoulder that comes through. There are good physios, good general physios who can solve shoulder problems. I think our approach is something that is really about that idea of athletic development and prevention. And that's something that, is a mindset, and a mindset shift needs to change across not just shoulders, but across all areas of the body. Is you'd go and see a personal trainer to get fit and improve, and you're happy to invest quite regularly in that, but you won't go to a physio until you've got a shoulder pain. And yet there are people out there who span both codes really in terms of athlete development and physio, who've got all the tools available to be able to tell you how far off you are in certain areas to be able to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah, I think there's this new breed of physio now. We've spoken a bit about it. I've used the term physio-coach for a while, and I know that you've used it for even longer. So I'll give you the original credit for it. Certainly, what year was it you said that you started to have this conversation?
So I through Arsenal, I got in touch with a guy you probably and the listeners might know, Kelly Starrett, and it was because he wrote a book called The Supple Leopard. Anyway, we invited him to Arsenal to do a workshop. It was fantastic. It impressed Colin Lewin, who's difficult to impress, and he really enjoyed that workshop. And then Kelly and I afterwards, he's a very giving person in terms of his time, really helped support me. And one of the things he talked about was how I was a physio coach, and that resonated with me because that's what I was trying to do. And I think it gives you that broad spectrum approach from start to finish of an injury back to the field, back to the pitch, which you don't have if you're an S&C, traditional S&C coach. You definitely don't have if you're a traditional medic or physio. You take them so far, but then you're limited in taking them any further. So that physio coach word, probably it was from Kelly, he might have got it from someone else, are these dual qualified practitioners who have skin in the game in both camps.
You plug the gap. There's sometimes
Absolutely.
a huge gap between those two professions, and it plugs the gap.
And you're not therefore saying as a physio with an S&C Masters that you are capable of taking on a job and being the S&C coach for the All Blacks, for example. You're not periodising for teams and athletes and groups and taking them to the gym, but you can have a really solid conversation around adaptation, about physical performance and development with your peers, and that then elevates you.
I think some of my best rehab learning has come from working alongside strength and conditioning coaches and really top personal trainers. So that's another tip I often give to people. Don't just surround yourself with other physios, but put yourself in environments where you're working with different professions that make sense to your development. And it often is a little bit different. I mean, I remember reading some of the Brett Contreras, the glute guy. That stuff there has really influenced my early career. So much of what I learned was from that world, because we just didn't get taught it. Like physio rehab teaching is terrible. So it's just find someone who can teach you better.
It's the pathological model. It's the disease model, it's the medical model. And when you ask the question, and I'd spend a lot of time with Alex Wolf, and he's a super sharp guy who knows more than just S&C and has been involved in high level environments for many, many years. We were sitting there, we did a workshop in LA recently, which was amazing. And we were literally asking the question, why do people get injured? And the audience will say, well, it's the position, or it's the it's the vulnerable position, or it's the repetition, or it's the no. Why are they getting injured? And what it fundamentally comes down to is that the tissue breaks, and the reason the tissue breaks is force in some capacity. It doesn't break because you're in a position. It breaks because you're in a position and a force is applied, and nothing else can then offload that, and it hits that specific tissue.
I've had this exact same idea of trying to really break this down to the simplicity of it. The load capacity of the tissue has been exceeded.
Yes.
Full stop.
Yes.
And
yes.
There's stuff around that, but that's essentially what's happened.
Exactly that. And then that allows you to go, well, what does our testing look like? Is it sufficient to challenge that tissue? Is it sufficient based on a needs analysis of the sporting demand and the positions they like to be in with the forces? But force has to be in the conversation. And that's why physios need to go and work with good strength and conditioning coaches, because they understand force. Now, physios understand diagnostics and pathology, but that's an afterthought because they've already broken down. So couldn't we be better if we all understood principles of adaptation and stopped giving out 3 sets of 10 and truly understood intensity? A lot of the clients I see who come in, I go through their rehab and on paper it looks great. And then I ask them, what's your physical effort for that external rotation exercise? They say it's 3 or a 4. Have you ever done anything that says 7? No. Well, that's why you're weak.
There's no drive towards adaptation.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And no thought towards it. The reason why that happens is because it's confirmation bias, and people will see shoulders when they're in their boots and their current state is their habitual capability is low. They've had an operation, or they've been injured, or they've deconditioned. They throw a bit of a 3 or 4, a low level intensity exercise, and it's a 7 stimulus for them at that point.
And then they stop.
But then that can only take them so far, and after that they don't add and change the intensity, which is why people's physio exercise for shoulders tend to be capacity driven, endurance driven, and not really around intensity.
I also believe it's fear. I think physios are terrified of re-injuring their patients. And if they're terrified of re-injury, they shy away from intensity. If they shy away from intensity, they underload. If they underload, they increase the risk of re-injury.
Yeah.
So I think they get it the wrong way round. They're scared of the right thing, but they're doing it the wrong way.
And the fallacy with shoulders is that you don't load shoulders.
Right.
Because people talk about this kinetic chain and go, well, it's 50% from the ground, 30% from your trunk, and 20% from your shoulder. So therefore you don't need to load the shoulder. You need to improve your lower body strength, and that will help you throw whatever, a javelin or throw a fastball. But if you look at it the other way, and this is an Alex Wolff conversation as well, if you do not strengthen that 20% optimally, you're saying that instead of throwing 100 miles an hour, you're only willing to throw 80.
You're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah. And the problem is that people have done really bad things by isolated loading of the shoulder and not considering the rest. But equally, people have done some really bad things by only strengthening the rest and not looking isolated at the shoulder. You have to cover both.
The pendulum swings too far in either direction.
Yeah.
And it's somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And some of these are universal principles of strength and conditioning that you can only learn through further study and exposing yourself, because physio just isn't set up to teach that in the early stages. And we've covered a lot here about people of influence in our careers. And something that I was thinking of earlier and stumbled across in my own mind, I guess, is that in a desire to be the best physio, you have to have the best people around you. You can't be the best physio on your own. You have to surround yourself with the best people, and that then elevates you. You mentioned that term earlier. You're elevated by those people. Yeah. And if there's people around you that do the opposite, I think we've both done this in our careers, that stop inspiring you and stop teaching you and you stop learning. You have to be in a different environment. You have to find that.
Yeah.
What else do you think that those aspiring physios who want to be the best physios, what else do you think they need to be aware of?
So, I mean, I think just on that, we talked a little about my own personal development outside my domain-specific expertise. And I now have people who are wanting to support and elevate me above my own capability. I work with my peers and I surround myself with brilliant people who want to add value and work together with me. And that is energizing in itself. I would say that you need to look for those people. You need to offer to help and support people. You probably need to identify some potential mentors. When I look at my mentorship, I've mentioned a couple of people today, but in reality, it's my peers that are my mentors, the Ben Rosenblatts of this world, who are similar to me, trying to build their own businesses at the same time. We're trying to solve the same problems. And I learn a lot more from my peers in solving those problems. But I have good people around me, and I think it's just being humble enough to know that you're not quite the finished article, the willingness to move, the understanding of where you want to go as well, the purpose, the understanding where you are, the reality of where you are, and then the steps that you need to go, the mindset you need to have, and then the people that you need to surround yourself with. Those are the key things for me in terms of my own ongoing development.
So I've found in the last 3 years of being an entrepreneur that it's been the most stimulating part of my career so far, and I can see a forever future of learning in different ways as a business owner now, and it's been one of the most liberating things I've done in my career so far, and I never would have expected it. You've clearly taken that role on as well as an entrepreneur and really driving forwards the Athletic Shoulder as a brand and as a business. What has that offered, and how has that inspired your further learning as you've gone through?
Yeah, it's offered a new challenge. And I think with that, it's offered the opportunity to also explore a variety of different ways of working. I'm someone who, one of my values is kind of freedom. It's not a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And what this, if you like, this entrepreneurial aspect is, how do we create a future for my business and ultimately for my family? So the challenges are then, well, what are you trying to achieve? And you can put it up on a whiteboard, and I have done. I want to be the world's best, the leading people in terms of athletic shoulders, worldwide in terms of learning, support for athletes. The challenge then is how do we make that journey? How do we structure that? Try and align everything in one particular direction and not get distracted. And I think that's just been a series of mini business experiments. I read a lot, but I'm a very, I'm like freedom. I don't want to read a full book. I'll read and take on the concepts and apply it. I'm a bit of a Blinkist kind of person anyway around that sort of stuff, but I'll pick something up and apply it. And there's some stuff from like Harvard Business Review around rapid results initiatives and aligning current projects to each other so that you can do more than one thing at the same time. Outside of that then, if all three arms of your business are going in the same direction and they all feed each other, which mine do now, it's perfect. We've got learning, we've got rehab, and we've got consultancy, but they all feed each other and support each other. So we can take on projects which will work for one with an elite team, for example, a Major League Baseball team, but then that knowledge and experience will distill down into what we deliver in terms of our content and our workshops. And then that itself then fuels and supports the cricketer that comes from a local college who now knows what his data looks like versus a Major League Baseball pitcher. So that in itself is this ecosystem that we've created. The challenge is not the domain-specific expertise, it's the scaling it now. And so what we're developing is a number of resources, more online content. And then you probably found this as well, but the clarity of what you do as a business, like what is Athletic Shoulder, and all the things you perhaps assume and take for granted that people will just follow a social media or see you and instantly join the dots of how you can help them. Well, that's not clear to people. So there's a huge amount that I don't know about finance, marketing, promotional bits, administrative, legal. You've got to see yourself as being a big business. And I think when you start out as an entrepreneur, you play at it a little bit and you just have to navigate that. And then gradually, as you get to the stage where it starts to scale, you recognize and realize the need to actually have good support from other people, to start to build a team that can sit around you. And like I would with a hip, if I needed an opinion, I'd go to an expert. I might play at it for a bit, but I'd go to seek a professional advice. And I think that's the kind of place I'm at the moment. Is like, I need to know how we best market this, how we then best brand this, how we do those things. Because I'm a curious problem solver, that's energizing in that it's away from your bread and butter. It's something new. You're always learning and always taking on new stuff. All those challenges, being an entrepreneur is like jumping out of a plane and like building your parachute on the way down, is what someone said to me. And I think it's a really good analogy, because there's always something to be done and there's always a challenge there that you're not quite sure how to solve. And that's the cool thing.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said it any better myself. It's how I feel about it too. And I guess the thing I would add is that I wasn't ready to run a business and build a business until I suddenly realized I was ready to run a business. And I think some people might almost jump in too soon, think I need to create this thing now. But it was only through my career of trying to be the best physio that it emerged as the only way that I was going to carry on my learning and development in the way I wanted to, was to create the thing for myself. So for some people, I think they can start earlier, but mine just suddenly felt right and suddenly felt urgent at the time that it did, rather than maybe having done it before, it was ready when it was ready. And I feel like the episode has come full circle here, in that we were saying, what is an athletic shoulder right at the beginning? And here we're now saying, what is an athletic shoulder business? And you figured out the first part earlier in your career. And now you're on this next phase, this next learning journey of building a business. And you've just described all the stuff that I love about it as well, of trying to solve some stuff myself and wanting to know enough about it myself, but realizing that I need people around me that could also do those things. I'm not and don't want to be a marketing expert, but I want to know a bit about it.
Yeah.
I want to know when they choose to do the things they choose. I want to know why they're doing it, and I want to learn about it so that I can ask them better questions, so that they can really figure out what I want from it as well. And all those things give me infinite experiences for learning, infinite opportunities to follow and figure out, all based around my desire to help people, and all channeled through our vision to provide an infinite journey of better health for our physio clients. And that's where yours is coming from. You've got this real passion about delivering athletic shoulder across the world. What a great inspirational story that is. And it's started off by trying to be the best physio you could be in the shoulder world, and now it's come around to helping even more people. You're scaling your ability to help people. Is there anything that we've not spoken about that adds some extra detail into the last part of the episode here?
I think we've covered a huge amount. I suppose, in essence, there's, just as we spoke about with the physical and the mental aspects of being an elite performer, there's also the mental aspects of being a leader, an entrepreneur, an owner, a founder.
A high-performance physio.
A high-performance physio, and even beyond that, like a director of performance for your company. And that comes with all those challenges. It's very difficult to quieten the mind. And I think self-preparation, I told you, I've just finished and submitted the PhD. I've got to defend it. That's 6 years of work. And for the last 9 months, whilst I've been building my business in its third year, I've been trying to do a full-time PhD alongside that, whilst also trying to be a dad and a husband. How do I prepare myself well to do that? Well, I have to set up some pretty good habits and some powerful habits around that. And we did touch on this beforehand. I said about meditation, and people might I used to laugh this off as being something that was almost irrelevant, but the sea is changing, and I wanted to get to know more about it. And I said to you before the episode, I didn't have time to meditate because I was so busy, which is so paradoxical and ironic and ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I've got to that point now where I've started because one of my good friends and supporters in America said, firstly, it's not as difficult to start as you think. And there's a system that can take a little amount of your time, and it's a consistent habit that you can build up and develop. And so finally I've started. And one of the quotes I love in my life and has been on my whiteboard and I talk about with my wife is, keep starting until you finish, which is Seth Godin. That is me, because there's a reluctance to start something. Sometimes there's a fear of starting something. But you've got to keep going out there and starting. And I've started to meditate now, and I've started to journal. And already, in a very short space of time, I can see the potential benefits of that for me in terms of putting myself and looking after myself with the same care and attention that I try and look after others. And if I don't do that, then, you know, I won't be able to sustain what I'm trying to achieve for me and for my business and for my family.
There's been plenty of these nuggets already, but we always ask our guests that we ask them, what does better never ends mean to you? The concept of better never ends is my why. That's why I do what I do. And it inspired the early point of this podcast. It's inspired my business. So it's always great to hear other people's interpretation of that and how they might consider that. So what's your version of better never ends?
Well, it's a great jump off point, because if you keep starting until you finish, there is no finish. So it just creates movement towards a goal, a purpose, a direction. It constantly evolves and changes. That's why it never ends. If you've got anything about you and you want to improve yourself and others around you, you'll do it. You'll move from A to B, but then B becomes A again, and then it's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So I think we've talked about it in terms of specifics, but it's not just being a good physio. It's all those other bits around it as well. Being a good person, human, giving back, being a mentor. We've got interns in our company now that I try and give an opportunity to. Identifying people that have a passion and an energy that I can help and lift up, because there's other people doing that to me. So it's trying now to give a bit back to the world, I suppose. I mean, I can't believe I'm listening to myself say that. Sounds a bit fluffy, but it's true. It's a truth. I think that's what I'm trying to do. So better never ends isn't just about yourself. It's about how you can influence and impact others.
There's a great book by Adam Grant called Give and Take. That if you've come across it, it's very much along those lines. There is an optimal amount of giving that helps people feel like there's more purpose to their life. And as much as in the world there's a lot of takers out there, in the end, the people that really make it are the ones that give back. So there's some value in it across the board. So yeah, I can see why it's working so well for you at this stage in your career. The other thing that's reminded me of, and I'm probably going to go quite personal here on how it's influencing the podcast. This mentality of better never ends. We've been going for a while now. We've been consistent. We're starting to think about growing our podcast and reaching more people. And part of that is about being a bit more specific about who we're speaking to. When I first started this podcast, we were speaking to the general public. And now I think we have more connection with our physio audience and people in that healthcare space. So we've started thinking a bit more about it being more towards those physio coaches out there. We've spoken about how both of us believe in that philosophy. And we won't stop talking about health, because a good coach understands health. We won't stop talking about things that are around coaching. We'll keep thinking about physio, but we're just going to spend a bit more time speaking to physios, both such as you as a guest, but also to our audience. And as a result, we're going to be asking our listeners now, actually, that if they are interested in it, leaving a review, that stuff really helps. And as we now start something, because we haven't finished yet, we want to get more people leaving a review, recommending our podcast, sharing it out there. So that's our part of our next stage in development as a podcast, actually thinking about being more specific with who we're targeting. So your ideas then have inspired me. We were having these conversations behind the scenes, and yeah, it's been helpful to hear you speak about it in a different way too. So yeah, that's part of our next phase, and this is, I guess, the jumping off point for that as well. And our listeners, if they've got this far, are interested enough to know a bit more about you, Ben. So if they don't know where to find you, how does someone find out more about you?
Yeah, so social media would be at Athletic Shoulder on Instagram, LinkedIn profile, either myself personally, Ben Ashworth, or Athletic Shoulder. We have a YouTube channel, we have a website, athleticshoulder.com, and we have a team now. So we have people in London working here at Until, we have people in Edinburgh, and we're starting to build a registered practitioner framework around the world. So we're trying to make ourselves accessible to whoever reaches out, whichever country and whichever language, wherever they come from. So I think, please reach out. Most people don't. And so the ones that do instantly identify themselves as someone who has a passion and energy and is willing to learn. Those people have become my interns, and those people have become people who work for me now and are part of my team and a trusted part of my team. So yeah, if I can help, let me know. I haven't got a PhD on the book, so I need to do something to fill my time. Please get in touch, reach out.
Thanks very much. Great finish. Great message. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Better, provider of health and wellness services in central London. We really believe that we can help people feel better and live better. You can book in for face-to-face services at any of our 3 London clinics. We have one in Marylebone, one in Soho, and one in the city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Better Never Ends, or head over to our website for more information about the clinics or the podcast at www.betterneverends.com.